This seat's taken, my mother smirked, pointing to a chair in the corner. Everyone giggled as I sat there. Then the check came, $2,500. The waiter stared at me. I just grinned and said, "Not my bill." So, I guess this is one of those stories that builds up over time, you know? It's not just about that one dinner, but everything leading up to it. My name is Clara, 29F, and I grew up in a family where everything had to be done a certain way. My mom, Janet, 58F, is the queen of that certain way, and for as long as I can remember, she's had a way of making everyone in her orbit dance to her tune. She has this ability to twist situations to make herself look like the ultimate authority, and no one's supposed to question it. But, yeah, over the years, I've come to realize that questioning her was exactly what I needed to do. Let me start with the dinner. It was supposed to be a celebration, my mom's 60th birthday. Simple enough, right? Not quite. It was more like a performance for her. She's always wanted to feel special, always wanted to be the center of attention, even if it meant making everyone else around her feel, well, not so special. Honestly, I've lost track of the number of times she's thrown these celebrations that aren't really for anyone but herself. Still, I showed up because it's my mom, and family is family, even if that sometimes feels like a trap. We met at this fancy restaurant in the city, one of those places with the white tablecloths, low lighting, and food that's so overpriced it might as well come with a side of guilt. To be clear, I didn't want to go. At all. It wasn't because I don't like my mom, though that's complicated, but because I knew exactly how the evening was going to unfold. My mom is one of those people who, when she decides something, it's the thing. And if you don't like it, well, tough luck. She had a habit of picking the most expensive places, and when she wanted a quiet, intimate meal, it wasn't quiet at all. It was a spectacle. When we all arrived, my mom, my dad, Mark, 31M, and me, I was already bracing myself for whatever weirdness was about to unfold. The first thing my mom did was announce to the waiter that we were here to celebrate her big day, like we needed a reminder. The waiter, who looked like he'd dealt with her type 100 times before, gave a polite nod and led us to our table. My mom, of course, insisted on being seated at the head of the table. Like, the literal head of the table. No one else could sit there. Not even my dad, who's the one who usually claims that spot. But it wasn't just about the seating. No, it was much more than that. It was a performance for her, where she had to be the star, and everyone else just had to go along with it. We sat down, and my mom, with a big smile on her face, started giving the waiter a list of special requests for the night. Everything from the temperature of the food to the exact positioning of the silverware. The poor guy just nodded, trying to keep things moving smoothly, but it was obvious he wasn't thrilled with how picky she was being. I could feel the tension building already. As we sat down, my mom immediately began talking about her latest business venture. She's the kind of woman who's always trying something new to make money, and she loves to talk about it, loves to make everyone believe that she's some kind of financial genius. I don't really mind when people are successful, but the way my mom talks about it is more like rubbing it in. Like, "Oh, I've done so well for myself. You should really think about investing in this." Or, "You can't even begin to imagine the things I've learned over the years." It gets old, fast. Mark, my older brother, didn't say much. He's a bit of a mama's boy, to be honest. He always tries to make things go smoothly, and that night was no different. He smiled politely, nodded at the right times, and didn't challenge her on anything. Meanwhile, I just sat there, feeling my irritation grow. It's not that I don't love my mom. I do, in my own way, but there's only so much I can take before the resentment bubbles up. The night went on with my mom running the show, as usual. She ordered the most expensive dishes on the menu, and every time the waiter brought something to the table, she'd make a show of how impressed she was with the presentation. It was all very dramatic, and while everyone else at the table just laughed or nodded along, I felt like an outsider in my own family. I could never quite get into the same mindset as them, the mindset that it was all okay, that it was fine for my mom to put everyone in a position where we had to pretend to enjoy the evening when, really, we all knew it was all for her. Here's where things start to get a little uncomfortable. About halfway through the dinner, my mom casually announced that we were splitting the bill. She said it with such authority, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. I froze for a moment. Splitting the bill? No way. She had money, I knew that. Mark wasn't exactly rolling in cash, but he wasn't broke either. And me? Well, I've got a decent job, but I was far from having the kind of disposable income that would let me just drop hundreds on a meal. I assumed it would be like every other family dinner we've had, where she'd pay. and then I'd be expected to help with the next one, or buy her a nice gift, or something. That's usually how it works, right? But my mom wasn't done. She then made a big deal out of the exact seating arrangements at the table, and to my surprise, she pointed at the farthest chair from everyone else, the one in the corner, and said, "Clara, you sit there. It's the best spot." I was confused. I didn't want to sit in the corner. I wanted to be near the others, near the action. But her smirk was unmistakable. "That seat's taken," she said with a sort of playful but cutting tone. And just like that, I was relegated to the corner, like some afterthought in my own family celebration. At first, I thought it was just me overreacting. Maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But as the evening wore on, I began to feel like I was invisible. No one spoke to me much, and when they did, it was in that awkward, "we don't really know what to say to you" way. And every time I tried to join the conversation, my mom would either change the subject or make some snarky comment that didn't quite land. I felt trapped. And the worst part? It wasn't the first time she'd done something like this. Over the years, I had gotten used to being dismissed, to being sidelined, to having my opinions ignored. But this was different. The dinner came to an end, and that's when it happened. The bill. The waiter walked over to us, carrying this massive leather folder with the check inside. My mom reached for it, and that's when the price hit me. It was $2,500. $2,500. Now, I know what you're thinking. How did that happen? The meal wasn't even that extravagant, but between the fancy appetizers, overpriced entrees, and the drinks, I'll admit, I had a drink, it all added up. My mom looked at it, her eyes practically gleaming, like this was exactly what she wanted. She smiled, casually flipping through the bill as if it was no big deal. "Don't worry about it," she said, looking at me with a smirk that could have cut glass. "We'll take care of it." But there was one little thing I didn't expect. The waiter, after a moment of hesitation, turned to me. His eyes flickered between my mom and me before finally landing on me. And that's when it hit me, she was trying to make me pay. I could feel the heat rising in my chest as I stared at the check in front of me. $2,500. The number was burning itself into my brain. I could already feel the tightness in my throat, the way my hands clenched into fists under the table. My mom, oblivious or maybe just too focused on her own little performance, casually slid the check toward me and then shot me one of those smiles. You know the kind I mean, the smile that's full of too much sweetness and just a touch of mockery, like she knew she'd just set me up. I looked at her for a second, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't a regular dinner where we all paid our parts, or where she paid and made a joke about me owing her for the next couple of months. No, this was different. She wasn't just suggesting I pay my part. This wasn't even her giving me the look to contribute as a nice gesture. No, she was expecting me to cover the entire thing. "Clara, sweetie," she said, her voice oozing with that forced sweetness that made my skin crawl, "you don't mind, right? We've been treating you to so much, and I'm sure you can take care of this one. It's just a small contribution, don't you think?" I blinked, once, twice. My brain was trying to catch up with what I was hearing. My mom had this way of acting like her words were a perfectly reasonable request. It's not the first time she's done this, but it felt different now, more deliberate. She wasn't just expecting me to pitch in like she did before. She was demanding that I take responsibility for everything. As if the night was my fault, as if I had somehow caused this insane bill. As if I was obligated to pay for her self-indulgence. The waiter was standing there, shifting uncomfortably. I could see his eyes darting between my mom and me, his face full of that awkward tension you get when you're witnessing something clearly off but not sure how to handle it. I could feel his silent judgment, and for a split second, I almost felt sorry for him. He was trapped in this strange little family drama. But then my anger flared again, and the last thing I cared about was how the waiter felt. I didn't want to look at her. I didn't want to engage with her right then, but she was waiting. My mom was practically daring me, her eyes sparkling with the same energy I'd seen so many times before. She was testing me, seeing if I would fold under pressure. And the thing is, I had always folded before. Always. But this time, I felt something in me snap. "No," I said flatly. It wasn't loud, but the word felt like a declaration. My mom's smile faltered just a fraction. For a moment, I saw something that wasn't anger, but something darker, disappointment, maybe, or the tiniest glimmer of confusion. She didn't like being told no, not after she had spent so much of her life not hearing it from me. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice now carrying that sharp edge I knew all too well. I said no. I wasn't sure where this sudden strength came from, but it was like a wave had swept over me. My mind was racing. How many times had she done this to me before? How many times had I quietly paid my dues for her extravagant lifestyle, for her need to always come out looking like the one in control? Too many. Her lips pressed together in a tight, thin line, and I saw her eyes narrow ever so slightly. Clara, really? This is your idea of paying respect to your mother on her birthday? After everything I've done for you? Mark shifted in his seat. He hadn't said much all evening, but I could see his discomfort. My brother, the one who always tries to stay out of drama, was now clearly caught in the middle. But it wasn't his battle, and I wasn't about to let him pretend it was. He could feel the tension in the air. I could tell, but he wasn't going to speak up. He never does when my mom is involved. My dad, too, was sitting there quietly, as he always did. The man who had been married to my mom for over 30 years and still couldn't seem to understand that I wasn't the child I once was. Maybe he didn't even care to understand. He didn't say anything. He never did. The table was dead silent now. I was acutely aware of the eyes on me, of the weight of the moment pressing in. I took a deep breath and leaned forward, making sure to keep my voice steady. I'm not paying for this, Mom. Not this time. Her fingers clenched around the bill folder, and for a moment, I thought she might snap. But instead, she just stared at me, that unsettling smile creeping back across her face. You know, Clara, you really are ungrateful. I've been nothing but supportive of you your whole life, and this is how you repay me. My heart pounded as I met her gaze. Supporting me? By making me feel like I owe you everything for the bare minimum? You know, it's funny. You always act like you're giving me something, but every time I try to stand up for myself, you turn it into me being the problem. There was a long pause. Mark shifted in his seat again, but it wasn't because he was uncomfortable with what I had said. It was because he knew that this wasn't just a disagreement anymore. This was a showdown. My mother, the woman who had been able to manipulate me, my brother, and my father for years, was now staring down the one person who was done with playing along. I could feel the weight of the moment as my mom's face flushed with frustration. The mask of sweetness she had been wearing slipped just a little. You'll regret this, she said quietly, in a tone that sent chills down my spine. You always regret crossing me. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. Maybe, but not today. It was in that moment I realized something. This wasn't about money. This wasn't even about the dinner or the bill. It was about control. About her power over me and how she used everything in her life to maintain it. The way she used her charm, her manipulation, her endless need for validation to keep everyone around her in check. And for years, I had played along, quietly enduring the little digs, the lectures, the subtle put-downs. But this time, I wasn't going to. My mom's smile twisted into something darker now, something that made me realize just how much I had underestimated her. She wasn't done. She would find another way to make me pay. It didn't matter whether I paid for this meal or not, she'd make sure I felt the consequences for defying her. The waiter, clearly unsure about how things had escalated, took a step back and stood there, still holding the check. I could tell he wasn't sure whether to step in or just wait for this weird little drama to play out. But the silence was deafening. It was like the entire world had paused, just waiting for one of us to blink. Then, my mom broke the silence again, this time with a cruel, almost victorious laugh. Well, if you're not going to take responsibility for your actions, Clara, then I guess I'll just have to make sure the rest of the family knows what kind of person you really are. They'll understand why you didn't want to help out tonight. I felt a wave of cold dread wash over me. I knew what she meant. She wasn't talking about the dinner anymore. She was talking about the bigger picture. She was going to go to everyone else in the family, my aunts, uncles, cousins, and spin this into something that painted me as the ungrateful, selfish daughter who wouldn't even help her mother on her birthday. The woman who had given me everything and was now being rejected. It was her signature move, smear my reputation, make me look bad to everyone who mattered. And it worked. Every time. But not this time. Not today. Not this time, Mom, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm swirling in my chest. The smile faded from her face, replaced by something colder, sharper. Something that promised that this was far from over. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, that things were about to get a lot worse. I could feel the air between us tighten, like a rope slowly pulling taut. My mother was glaring at me now, her eyes narrowing with that chilling intensity that had always been a prelude to something much worse. I knew exactly what she was going to do. This was just the beginning. She wasn't used to being defied. She wasn't used to losing control. The smile I'd seen earlier was gone. In its place, her lips were pressed into a tight, angry line, as though she was calculating her next move. The waiter, awkwardly standing there with the check still in his hands, probably had no idea how to handle this situation. He looked at my mom, then at me, his gaze flickering back and forth like he was hoping someone would give him the signal to do something. But I didn't care about the waiter. I didn't care about the dinner. I didn't care about how much my mother was going to fume or how everyone else at the table was looking at me like I had suddenly become the villain. This was bigger than the meal. This was about standing up for myself, finally. And my mom wasn't going to make me feel small anymore. You know, my mom said, her voice low and cold, this is exactly why no one takes you seriously. You think you can just refuse to play by the rules and get away with it. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I had learned by now that the more you engaged with her when she was in this mood, the worse it would get. She thrived on that back and forth, feeding off the argument, drawing everyone into her drama. She didn't care about the truth, she cared about control, about making everyone bend to her will. She wanted me to feel like I was in the wrong, like I owed her something for daring to challenge her. Fine, Clara, she said, standing up suddenly, her chair scraping sharply against the floor. If you won't take responsibility for this, then I'll have to make sure everyone else in this family understands what kind of person you've become. You know what? You've always been so difficult, so ungrateful. Let's see how your little stunt here plays out. The smugness in her tone hit me like a slap. My heart was still pounding, but something in me, something deep and steady, shifted. I could feel the weight of her words, but this time, I wasn't going to let her manipulate me. She thought she had power over me because of all the years of guilt, of her carefully curated image of being this sacrificing mother who did everything for her family. But that image had always been a lie, and now I was ready to expose it. The rest of the family at the table sat still, almost frozen in place. Mark, who had been quiet throughout most of the night, was now visibly uncomfortable, his eyes shifting between the two of us. I could see the conflict in his face, his usual passive approach to family drama starting to crack. But he wasn't going to say anything. He never did. My dad, though, was the worst. He sat there like a statue, his expression unchanged, as though he were mentally checked out. I had always hoped, deep down, that one day he would speak up, would finally see my mom for who she truly was and stand with me. But he never did. He didn't have the courage, or maybe he just didn't care enough to intervene. I glanced at the waiter, who was still standing there, caught in the crossfire. He must have realized that this wasn't the time for politeness, so he awkwardly set the check on the edge of the table and backed away. I watched him retreat into the kitchen, no doubt eager to leave the storm brewing at our table behind. The moment he was gone, my mom turned back to me, her voice dripping with venom. You've always been difficult to deal with, Clara. Never following the rules, always thinking you know better. Well, I'm done. You're going to regret this. You think you can refuse to take responsibility for your actions? Fine. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of daughter you really are. Her words hung in the air like a threat, and in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about the bill or the dinner, it was about control. She was trying to force me into a position where I would apologize, where I would admit that I was wrong and beg for forgiveness. That was always the pattern with her. If I didn't fall in line, she would punish me by turning the family against me. She'd always been able to do it before, using her charm to manipulate everyone into believing that she was the victim, that I was the rebellious one, the ungrateful daughter. But not this time. This time, I wasn't going to let her win. Not anymore. I could feel a surge of determination flood through me, and I knew I had to act fast before she had the chance to spin her web of lies. There was a part of me that had been terrified of her for so long, terrified of being cast out or being seen as the problem, but now that fear had started to dissolve. If she thought she could twist the truth and make me out to be the villain in this, then I was going to have to turn the tables. Go ahead, Mom, I said, my voice steady. Make sure the family knows what kind of person I am. But you'd better be ready for the fallout. I'm done being your scapegoat. I'm done being the one you can always blame when things don't go your way. My mom's eyes flared with indignation, her hands balled into fists on the table. She was seething now, barely able to contain her rage. You have no idea what you're doing, do you? You think you can just walk away from this and nothing will happen? You'll be nothing without me, Clara. Don't forget that. I didn't flinch. No, you don't get it. You spent my whole life making me feel small, making me feel like I owed you something, like I could never be enough. But that ends now. I'm not going to play by your rules anymore. For a long moment, there was only silence. The kind of silence that feels like it's stretching out endlessly, the tension hanging thick in the air. My mother stared at me, as if weighing whether to go even further, to push harder. But then something shifted in her eyes. It wasn't the usual calculating coldness that I'd seen for years. This was different. There was a flicker of something I hadn't seen before, uncertainty. I could see that for the first time, she wasn't entirely sure how to deal with me. And that realization that for once, I had her on the back foot was the most satisfying feeling I'd had in a long time. But just when I thought she might back down, she leaned in, her voice low and threatening. You think this is over? You think you've won? You haven't seen anything yet, Clara. You've made your bed. Now you're going to lie in it. I could hear the tremor in her voice, the crack beneath her cool exterior. She was scared. Scared because, for the first time, she wasn't in control. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I sat there, staring at my mother, who was still seething across from me. Her eyes were filled with pure fury, but beneath that anger, there was something else, something new. Fear. The realization that for once, she was losing control. That was the only victory I needed in that moment. She had always been the one in charge, pulling the strings, making sure I was too scared to stand up for myself. But now, I was finally ready to push back. And it felt like the world had shifted beneath my feet. The room was deathly quiet, the silence heavy with the weight of our standoff. I wasn't going to fold. Not this time. My mom opened her mouth, likely to say something biting, to throw another guilt trip my way, but before she could get the words out, I stood up slowly, deliberately. The action felt empowering, like I was taking control of the situation. I'm done, Mom, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm done with this game. You spent my whole life making me feel like I owe you something, making me feel like I need to beg for approval, constantly walking on eggshells around you. But I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not paying for this meal, and I'm not going to let you manipulate me into doing it. You can tell everyone whatever story you want, but I'm done playing your victim. She stared at me for a moment, as though trying to gauge whether or not I was serious. I saw her mouth open and close, her mind racing to come up with another insult, another way to make me doubt myself. But this time, I wasn't having it. I was stronger now, and I could see through her. Finally, with a sharp exhale, my mom stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Fine, she hissed, if that's how you want to be, Clara. I'll make sure the family knows what kind of daughter I have. They'll understand why I had to put up with you for all these years. And you'll regret this. Mark my words, you will. But I didn't flinch. I was done being the one to suffer in silence. I had always tried to appease her, to make her happy, to smooth over the tension. But all I was doing was enabling her behavior. No more. She stormed off, grabbing her purse and heading straight for the door without another word. Mark, my brother, who had been sitting quietly the entire time, finally spoke up, but his voice was shaky, unsure. Clara, maybe you should just pay the bill. I don't think Mom meant for it to get this bad. I shook my head, a bit more harshly than I intended. No, Mark. I'm not going to. You don't get it. She's been doing this for years, and it's not just about the money. It's about the control, the guilt, and I'm done with it. Mark didn't say anything else. He didn't argue, didn't push. I could see the tension in his face as he picked up his phone, likely texting our mom, trying to smooth things over. But he wasn't going to get through to her. No one ever did when she was in this kind of mood. I turned my attention back to the waiter, who was still lingering at the edge of the room, probably waiting to see how things would play out. I gave him a small, apologetic smile. Sorry about this. I'll take care of it, I said, reaching for my wallet. He nodded stiffly. No problem, ma'am. I'll just give you a moment. I felt the weight of the bill in my hands, but I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let her make me feel like I had to pay just to appease her. She wasn't going to win this time. Instead of paying the full amount, I opted to leave a generous tip for the waiter, telling him I was sorry for how things had gone down. The total was still significant, but I wasn't about to let my mom dictate how I spent my money, even if it meant an uncomfortable dinner. I didn't need to prove anything to her. I walked out of the restaurant, my head held high. Mark followed me out silently, his face a mix of confusion and worry. I could tell he was unsure where to place his loyalties. After all, he'd spent his whole life watching our mom manipulate me. But I didn't care. This wasn't about him, or anyone else. This was about me taking control of my life for once. The next few days were awkward. My mom didn't speak to me. She didn't reach out with any kind of apology or even an attempt to smooth things over. Instead, she took her frustrations out in a series of passive-aggressive texts, which I ignored. She called me ungrateful. She called me selfish. She told me I had betrayed her. But I saw it for what it was, just another manipulation tactic. But the real shift came when I started to see the cracks in her control over the rest of the family. A week after the dinner, I received a message from my Aunt Susan. She had called me out of the blue, and I could tell something was different. She didn't mention the dinner, didn't bring up the fallout. Instead, she just asked how I was doing. "I've been worried about you," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "Your mom. She's been saying some things, Clara. I'm sure you've heard. But I want you to know, I see things differently. You've always been a good person. You don't deserve to carry all that weight for her." It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Slowly, other family members began reaching out to me, too. Not because they didn't love my mom, but because they had started to notice the pattern of manipulation. They were beginning to see her for who she truly was, not the selfless, perfect mother she always portrayed, but a woman who thrived on control, on guilt, on keeping people in line through fear and shame. It didn't happen overnight. There were still moments when I had to stand my ground, when my mom would try to turn the rest of the family against me. But the difference now was that I wasn't alone. They were starting to see through her. They were starting to support me. Eventually, my mom came around, but it wasn't in the way I expected. After weeks of silence, she sent me a text. It was short, almost curt. "Fine. I'll drop it. But you owe me." I didn't respond right away. I took my time. Then I texted back, calm and clear. "I don't owe you anything, Mom. I'm my own person. And that's not changing." She didn't reply. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care. The family situation slowly shifted, too. They stopped letting her manipulate them as easily. They started to see her for who she truly was. And when she tried to use the same old tactics on them, they just shrugged it off. Her power over them weakened, just as it had weakened over me. I had no idea how long it would take for things to settle completely, but one thing was certain: the balance had shifted. For the first time in years, I felt like I had one.